Welcome to the Evolution Show. In the previous episode, we looked at China, the biggest EV market in the world. Today, we're going to look at a much smaller country, Norway, where almost half of all the new registered cars are either battery electric or plug-in electric. Let's look at the EV revolution in Norway. As always, we appreciate your feedback. Was it good or bad? If you like the show, consider subscribing. Now, let's get going with the conversation. This is the Evolution Show. Welcome to the Evolution Show. I'm your host, Johan Landgren. The Evolution Show is all about addressing some of the biggest challenges and opportunities of our time. In the previous episode, we talked about the Chinese EV market with Tibor Blomhäll. And today he's back again, but we're going to look at the Norwegian EV market, the leader in terms of electric cars in the world. Welcome back, Tibor Blomhäll.
Thank you very much.
Today we're going to talk about Norway and compare it a little bit to Sweden, where we are today. Why is Norway the EV market number one in the world?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. This small little country up at the North Pole is leading the EV revolution. They have the most electric cars per capita in the world. China may be the biggest electric market in numbers, but it's only about 4 or 5% of all the cars sold that are electric. In Norway, we have 56% of all the cars sold last year were electric or plug-in hybrid. And it's a fair question. Why is this little country leading the evolution? Well, it's not because of environmental friendly green forests, etc. It's because of this. May I present to you the height of Norwegian car making? This is the electric car Kevet Body. It was an electric car made in Norway by the Norwegian company in about 2005. They made this electric car. It had lead acid batteries of about 8 kilowatt hours. And if you were lucky, you could get 100 kilometers range out of it. If you were not so lucky, only 50. It varied greatly how far you could get. Basically, if it was uphill or downhill. And it was very expensive. It cost, if you translate to today's price range, it cost about the same as the SR Plus Tesla Model 3. So it was extremely expensive and, quite frankly, a terrible car. So the Norwegian government wanted to help this little Norwegian car manufacturer to survive, so they started all these incentives. In Norway, you have the value-added tax to start with, and then you had a separate car sales tax that is based on the emissions of the car, and it's a huge tax. If you buy, let's say, if you buy a Volvo in Norway, you pay the price of the car, you pay the value-added tax, and then you pay this sales tax, and the final price of the car is about twice of the price of the actual car. The other half is taxes. So what they did was to remove all the taxes for electric cars. You don't have to pay value-added tax. You don't have to pay the car sales tax. And you don't have to pay road tax, taxes or ferry taxes. So they tried to help this little company in every way they could. And they failed miserably. Nobody wanted to buy the car anyway. So they went bankrupt. The Norwegian car company went bankrupt, but the regulation was still there. So a few years later, when electric cars from other manufacturers started to appear, the regulation was still there. So suddenly you could buy an electric car for the same amount of money you buy a combustion engine car. So in most other countries, especially in the beginning, electric cars were very expensive. But in Norway, you had these regulations that made the cars as cheap or expensive, depends on how you look at it, as regular cars. So that's why people could get a car that is the same price as a petrol car, but you run it on cheap electricity.
I think it's really good to have in mind the kind of background to understand that both it kind of broadened the way for Tesla that came later, but also to if you compare to Sweden, Sweden has twice the population as approximately as Norway, but we also have a long history of industries. On a per capita basis, it's huge. We have Volvo trucks and Scania and so on, and that have sort of held us back since Volvo cars haven't been able to, provide the market with any kind of pure electric vehicle. But then entered Tesla, and we had at the same time as Norway a lot of people who wanted to have Teslas in Sweden, but we didn't have the regulations. We didn't have the infrastructure. It was super expensive to buy. And then 2012, 2013, Tesla came. Why do you think Tesla, was it regulation, or was it simply that it's such a kind of leading EV, that it took kind of Norway with storm, so to speak? Why is Norway so popular in Norway?
Well, as I said, because of the price. When Tesla came to Sweden, it was a really, really, really expensive car. Some people wanted to buy a Tesla and could afford it, but for most people, they looked at the price tag on the car and passed. They bought a Volvo instead for half the price. In Norway, you go to the car saloon and you had this Volvo for X amount of Norwegian money, or you had this sexy Tesla that made 0 to 100 in 3 seconds and was dirt cheap to fill up compared to the expensive petrol to drive your Volvo. So for most people, it was really a no-brainer.
Yeah, it was economically the driver. Yeah. That's good to hear. Interesting to hear, I think, because you might think that Norway. I'm sure there are a number of people who thought it was a good thing as well when they saw that it both was environmental, economic, but the economic thing was the driver, the main thing.
The environmental issues, for some people, they are really really important, and those were the people who bought electric cars in other countries. But let's face it, for most people, they want just get from A to B. Yeah. And as cheap as possible. Yeah.
Of course, if you look at Norway, there are a number of things that make it easy. You have the regulations, but you also have, you have free parking, you have the ability to drive in the bus lanes, at least in Oslo, I think.
I didn't mention it because, it's really important in Oslo, the parking and the bus lanes. But for the rest of the country, you don't have any bus lanes and you can park really anywhere you want.
Yeah, and perhaps one thing to mention, it's kind of part of the regulations, because I think if you're a company in Norway, you can get subsidies, at least for the gasoline stations, so on, to have charging infrastructure. You can get paid for for a large amount of it at least. So it's not super expensive. It's not only for Tesla, for all kinds of charging and hotels as well. I know that I've been to Norway is one of my favorite destinations to go with my family, and it's fantastic. Each time I went a couple of years with my mom, and we went to up in the northern part of Norway, and we found this fantastic small little hotel and huge parking area, and of course just outside the entrance there were several parking lots for EVs, and I think was 4 for Tesla and 8 for other EVs. What fantastic!
Yeah, because they are used to that their customers come with electric cars.
Yeah.
So that's like the chicken and the egg. If you get all these electric cars, you will get the charging infrastructure.
Yeah.
Suddenly there are lots of people who want to charge. And actually it works the other way around too. If you build the electric charging infrastructure, the cars will come.
Yeah.
So in Norway it just suddenly exploded that you could get a cheap electric car for the same amount of money as a regular car. And it shows what's lying ahead for the rest of the world. Because the electric car prices are coming down, and in a couple of years they will get to the same level as a combustion engine car.
Yeah.
And Norway shows us what will happen.
Mm.
You can talk about the environment and stuff, but people just want cheap cars that they can use in a cheap way.
Yeah, and they want it to be practical. Don't worry about stuff that should just work. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember my mom talked to a guy when we were charging, and he said that she asked, where are you going? Have you been to Sweden? And he said, like, yeah, we were planning the previous summer to go with our Tesla. No, not Tesla. It was a BMW i3. And he said that, no, we couldn't bring it because we looked at the charging infrastructure and we couldn't go where we wanted. So we had to take our old diesel car. And he was a bit frustrated about that. And so it can be, I mean, a problem for tourism as well. So it's a great win, I think, to be ahead of time, sort of to do this transition. You have only things to win to build this infrastructure. If you want people to go to Sweden from Norway and so on, they expect to have charging at the hotel and
Yeah, Swedish hotels and Swedish boutiques and shopping malls close to the Norwegian border, they had to get charging for their customers, because the Norwegian people were suddenly coming with electric cars, and where can we charge them? And this is also in Norway we had all these electric cars. In Sweden we had only a few, and Volvo is the main car manufacturer in Sweden. And actually when I have talked with so many politicians in Sweden, local politicians in cities and on the countryside, and they were not really interested in charging infrastructure. Why should we have it? It's expensive, blah blah blah. And until one was finally saying the real reason why they don't have charging infrastructure. He told me that we will not build any charging infrastructure until Volvo releases an electric car. That's it.
Yeah.
Because they knew when Volvo releases an electric car in Sweden, then suddenly everybody will buy it, and then they want to support Swedish car manufacturer like the Norwegians did.
And we can mention that the Polestar 2 is coming. It's not a Volvo pure electric car. It's another company, but it's connected to Volvo and so on. So a lot of people think, oh no, it's going to finally happen in Sweden because of Polestar 2. I'm not so sure. I'm sure there will going to be... I mean, I'm coming from a Volvo family. We've been buying Volvo. My first car was a Volvo. My parents had Volvo for years and years. But after my Tesla and my parents, they don't care so much about cars. They want to just drive it until it dies. So, but for the next car, they're definitely going to buy an EV. That's for sure. So, and that's
if it's a Volvo, even better.
yeah, but I don't think honestly, I don't think they think that way anymore. They are very kind of disappointed actually with Volvo. They don't. I mean, to be honest, you should deserve to have kind of to if you don't provide it, you don't expect people to buy it. That's my point. But let's compare a little bit the sales kind of in figures to understand the differences. People of course know that Norway is in the lead, but let's compare Sweden and Norway a little bit. What can you tell us about the different kind of sale figures, or give us an understanding?
Yeah, I mean, in Norway you had, as I mentioned, 56% of all cars that were sold last year were either electric or plug-in hybrid. 42% was pure electric cars. And actually the most sold car, not car brand, but the car model was the Tesla Model 3. 11% of all car sales in Norway last year were Tesla Model 3. As I mentioned, 42% EV, 56% total. That would make 14% plug-in hybrids. That's not many plug-in hybrids. Actually, the plug-in hybrid was a big thing in Norway a couple of years ago, but now people have moved away from it. They want pure electric cars. The plug-in hybrid sales fell something like 27% last year from the year before. So people are moving away from plug-in hybrids to pure electric cars. And of course, diesel sales fell 13%, and petrol car sales fell 30%. So people are really moving towards pure electric cars. Actually, I'm still wondering how somebody can decide to buy a combustion engine car in Norway today, because they are so much more expensive to have. It's about the same to buy, but it's much more expensive to fill up with gas, to make the service costs and so on. In Sweden, there's a bit different. We have about 4 or 5% electric cars and about the same amount of plug-in hybrids. So we are still in the era of plug-in hybrids in Sweden. Actually, many people mix those two together. They say that, I have an electric car, but when I talk to them, I realize that they really bought a plug-in hybrid. And that's because we have Volvo in Sweden, and they make a lot of hybrids and plug-in hybrids, but not any electric car yet. Well, they have shown the electric car, but it's not. They have not delivered it yet. So we are a couple of years behind Norway in the amount of electric cars versus plug-in hybrids.
Yeah, it's really interesting and a bit disappointing if you're a Swede. You're sort of sitting and waiting like this. When are we going to catch up? But at the same time, things are moving on a little bit here in Sweden, and I'm a little bit. I'm hopeful, at least. If you think about Northvolt now, the battery maker, they actually have experience from Tesla with Peter Carlson, the CEO.
Yeah, he came from
Tesla, and his colleague, I don't remember his name, but he's also from Tesla, actually. So they're bringing this kind of know-how to Sweden, and it's, of course, a lot of talk about this in Sweden. We talked about this earlier on the show. But do you think it could bring about, both kind of this interest for EVs from the government side? I mean, people in Sweden, they are talking about EVs a lot now. I don't think it's a matter of people not understanding anymore as it was just a couple of years ago. I think it's more about price and accessibility so on. So do you think it could, I mean, it's a battery factory, but do you think it can have an impact on Sweden the Northvolt factory, in terms of kind of pushing the regulations and so on?
I think it will have a psychological effect that suddenly batteries are good because right now or a couple of years ago batteries were bad for the environment, bad for everyone. But suddenly, it's a Swedish company, then it's good.
Yeah. So and kind of back to that question, what can we learn both in Sweden and other countries from Norway? What can we do that is not just a matter of supporting a domestic manufacturer? Most countries don't even have a car maker, so it has to be something else that's pushing this direction.
Yeah, I think we can learn. There is one thing we can learn and one thing we should learn. The can learn is that once the electric cars are coming down in price, people will buy them. I mean, as soon as the cars are affordable, you will not hear about the electric cars are bad for the environment, or the electric cars are just toys for the rich people, etc. Right now, it's a lot of talk about electric cars because people need a reason for not buying them.
Yeah.
Apart from I can't afford it.
Yeah.
Let's be frank. But Norway shows that once the electric cars are coming down in price, people will actually buy them. And the thing that we should learn is that yes, Norway has some economical help for buyers, a lot, because of basically electric cars are tax-free. You just like buying in a tax-free shop. But they also have some very smart legislations. For instance, in Sweden, we try to have some incentives. If you buy a charging station, you will get some incentives for home charging. A wall box, you get a couple of thousand crowns, a couple of $100 incentives. But in Norway, they said instead that you are allowed to put up your own charging station. What does it mean? Well, it's easy for you to put up a charging station if you live in your own house. You just put it up. But if you live in an apartment, you can't connect a charging box and start charging your car, because it's not your garage. It's the house owner who owns the garage, and most of the landlords do not want to install this strange electric stuff in our garage. Why do you need it? We don't have any petrol pumps either. But in Norway, they are not allowed by law to stop you. In Norway, you can ask your landlord could you please install a charging box for me, but the landlord cannot deny it for you. Perhaps you have to pay for it. He don't have to pay for the installation, but he can't deny you. So suddenly, for no cost at all, you have this legislation that makes so much easier for everyone, even people who live in apartments, to get an electric car, to get charging stations for their electric cars.
Yeah, and that's something to mention for people, other countries and cities that might think that, how can we do this? It's impossible. But if you look at Norway and other countries as well, I think in Netherlands they've been doing that as well. They're using kind of the lights on the streets and so on. You don't have to have very powerful outlets and so on. You can have you can use the power from what do you call it? Yeah, the lights on the traffic on the streets.
Street lights.
Street lights. Yeah. And and it's also most of the time it's placed close to the parking area or the street or the apartments, so you use them. You have slow charging during the night, and that's fine. And yes, it will cost a couple of billion euros or something, more than that perhaps, but in the long run you will get that back, because people, I think you've written about that, the price, the value of an apartment actually will go up if the landlord has access to charging, because in the new apartment people are buying or renting and so on, they demand that they have access to EVs, the EV accessibility, and if you don't, obviously the price of that housing will go down. So I think there are many positives with this as well.
Yeah, I usually compare it with satellite TV. When satellite TV came in the 90s, was it? Yeah. When they came in the 90s, it was people with own houses who put up these satellite dishes and could get all hundreds of channels of TV to watch. In an apartment, you were not allowed to have your own satellite dish. And now, a couple of years later, you can't really sell an apartment if it doesn't have cable TV, because everybody is expecting now, so you have cable TV and you have internet in the apartment, otherwise nobody will buy it. And I think it will be the same thing with electric car charging. Now it's easy for people with their own homes, own houses, to install electric car charging. In a couple of years, it will be very strange if you are trying to buy an apartment and they don't have electric charging for your car.
Yeah, and just one thing to mention as well, I think we're not going to dig into this, but vehicle to grid. I mean, people are talking about this problem in Sweden with balancing the grid locally, having capacity and so on. And we will see different kind of issues in different cities all over Europe and other parts of the world. But it's not as people think. It could actually be that if you have, the more vehicle you have, access to those storage units which you have in the batteries, if they work in a smart grid with vehicle to grid, it could actually be a solution, not an issue.
Yeah, I mean, people are usually concerned about this, but not power companies. Power companies love to have electric cars with vehicle to grid, because then they suddenly have this huge amount of batteries they can use to balance the electricity grid in a city or in the country.
Yeah.
So today, if the one part of the city needs extra energy, you have to channel it through the wires so that they have the electricity they need. But in the future, you can just allow the electric cars in that part of the city to give back some of the charge in their batteries and power for just really those couple of minutes they need to get to get the peak and electricity use under control.
Yeah. So okay, let's finish off a little bit with the summary. You've told us that one of the lessons from Norway is that they had prepared with regulations early on. They make it easy for charging infrastructure to own a car. It's everything with practical things like parking outside a hotel, making it easy to build the charging infrastructure. Everything is ready for the EVs, and from then on, everything kind of follows naturally. People are talking about EVs. They realize it's not a big issue.
Actually, people are not talking about EVs in Norway anymore. No. They're talking about cars.
Yeah.
I mean, let's see, 56% of the cars are electric. Then the natural thing in a car is now an electric engine. The ICE internal combustion engine is the strange one in Norway now. And people are talking about they are going to ban combustion engines in 2025, but Norwegian politicians say that we are not going to ban internal combustion engines. We don't need to. Nobody will buy them in 5 years.
No. No, I think that's a good way to end this conversation. Really interesting. I hope people have learned. I have learned a lot. Thank you again, Tibor.
Thank you.
If you enjoy this conversation as well, feel free to give us your input. Was it good or bad? In the next episode, I've invited Monica Sarufa. She is working with bike e-sharing in Australia. So she's going to tell us a little bit what she's doing in Australia, working on that. If you want to see the videos as soon as they come out, consider subscribing. I hope to see you in a week.